It was advertised as 42 years. That's because when I gave this a year ago, it was 42 years, but unfortunately, we've all aged a year, so it's now 43. And what that refers to is I got heavily back into model railroading back around 1980. So if you do the math, that's from 1980 to 2023, that's 43 years. So anyway. But this is basically kind of a compendium of just a whole bunch of stuff that I picked up during my 43 years of working in a hobby and the like. And so I thought I'd document it and share it. And so I'll start with all sorts of little things that I learned. One is telescoping magnet I found is very handy. I don't know about you, but I get klutzy sometimes and I drop stuff under my workbench. And the older you get, the harder it is to bend down and reach way under there and get it, especially like if it's a small screw or something. So what I do is I found a telescoping magnet at a hardware store, I think, and it's great because you just open it up and you can just stick it under the workbench there where the screw is or anything and grab it and pull it back up. Its cousin, which I found also at a hardware store, is a telescoping rake. And this is for when you drop those pieces that are not metal, that like a brass screw or something that a magnet will not pick up. You can get this little rake and you can open it up. It probably opens up to maybe about 2.5 feet. And again, if it's something that went way up under the layout or under the workbench or whatever, you can just open this thing up and pull it back towards you where you can get at it. And here it is, partially telescoped open. I didn't do it all the way just because the picture would have to be a lot bigger and you might not be able to see it. Another one is, I'm pretty sure a lot of us probably have a jar or a can on a workbench that's full of miscellaneous screws, nuts, and bolts. I have one with a lot of sheet metal screws, and I use them a lot of times when I'm mounting stuff on the layout. They're nice because they self-tap and everything, but you put them in a jar or a can, and then when you got to find the ones you want, you got to spread them out and pick through them to get the sizes you need, if you need a couple of the same size or whatever. And doing that can be a little messy. Sometimes they roll and fall on the floor. Picking them up and putting them back in the jar is no fun. And the like, even if you kind of scrape them over the edge of the workbench or whatever, sometimes they fall on the floor. And what I found is a little thing called a funnel tray, which makes the job nice, quick, and easy. And that's what it looks like. It's a parts tray, actually. It's not just for model railroads. You could use it for, down in the garage for working on an automobile or whatever. But it's basically just a four-sided tray with like a pouring slot or a spout on one corner. So here, if you're looking for that screw or a couple of those sheet metal screws, you dump them out in there. You can fish through them, find the ones you want and everything. And when you're done, you just pour them back into the can. You don't have to do it by hand or anything. You just do it nice and slowly, and they all go right back in. I was trying to find out where these are available. I've had these trays, these pouring trays, for a while, these funnel trays. But I took a look and I found some on eBay, just maybe under tools or whatever, just type in funnel tray. Sears sells them also on their website. So they're available, and you can order them, and they're kind of handy to have around, even in the garage. Clamps. I found these welding clamps. You see, that's the one in the upper right there. Very handy, especially when I was building an overhead elevated railroad. And they typically on Long Island, I mean, of New York, on some of them, they had wood planks that were next to the tracks and between the tracks. And so gluing them into place was kind of a challenge, and because I had to get around some of the structure and everything that I had, the uprights and everything, and I found that these welding clamps were just the ticket for that. Another kind of clamp is these paper clips, which are pretty handy too. You can open them up if you got a small part that you need to sandwich together. Use those as a clamp. And then the other one I really like are the squeeze to open tweezers. These are great, for example, if you're putting figures on your layout and you need to hold them upright while the glue is drying. You can put the figures between the tweezers, and then the tweezers will lay down on the workbench and stay upright, or keep the figure upright while the glue sets. You can also use them for grabbing kind of weird, hard to grab stuff that has to be glued. If you look down here in the lower right, this was a sign I had on my layout, and I guess the glue had come apart in one corner, so it was loose, and I had to reglue it, and I wanted to hold it in place. And the tweezers just did a wonderful job of doing that until the glue dried. Angle iron blocks. We all like when we're building models, we want sometimes a 90-degree block, so we know that we're building stuff and it's straight and at 90 degrees. A lot of places, model shops or whatever, will sell 90-degree blocks. They're not cheap, and the like. But what I found, we have a local welding shop here in the town I live in, and I went up there, and they have cut ends of angle iron, heavy angle iron, and those they're like a perfect 90-degree angle. And a lot of times you go up there, they're willing to give them away just to get them out of the place, or if anything, they'll sell them to you real cheap, the little ends they cut off. And so I went up there, I got a bunch of them. I just cleaned them up, spray painted them black, so there was no rust or anything. And not only do they make a good 90-degree angle, so when you're building a model, you have something that's upright, that's true 90 degrees, but they're also, if you're building something and you need some weights, these things are heavy. So they work equally well as some weights that you can use when you're gluing things together. LED strips. We're probably all familiar with these. LEDs are light emitting diodes. The advantage is they're bright, they're compact, they have a long life, they draw very little current. In other words, they don't get hot or anything. And they're relatively inexpensive. And they come in a variety of forms, such as on adhesive strips. So they're fairly easy to install. You can use these behind valances for layout lighting. I remember, I can't remember which convention it was at, but we visited one layout, and the owner of the layout had used LED light strips behind the valance to illuminate basically the whole layout. There were no other kind of lights in there, and it looked great. But you can also use these in strategic spots around your layout to highlight some scenes. I had the issue here. I do a cutaway of Pennsylvania Station because I was trying to show the Long Island Railroad platforms that are 2 levels below the station. 1 level below is a concourse, a shopping concourse, and then below it is the Long Island Railroad platforms. And I do run the third rail electric trains from a model at Jamaica Station. So I wanted to model the underground platforms. And so people could see them. It was a cutaway. But as you can see, I have track on top and the like, and it provides a shadow. So you really couldn't see very well. And so what I did is I got a LED strip and stuck it up underneath the track, that upper track, which is on that elevated subway, right underneath it. And you can see how much it illuminates the same scene, the underground platform, so people can really see what's going on. And if you look underneath, if you look way up underneath on that frame there, the unfinished piece of wood, right below it, underneath it, is the LED strip that's stuck on. Egg crate packing foam. Friend of mine a long time ago showed me this, and I thought, oh, wow, what a great idea. And a lot of times when we buy any kind of, electronic equipment or something, a lot of times it comes with egg crate packing foam with these little dimples and everything on it. And I found it makes a super surface for working on projects. For example, if you're working on a steam engine, first, it's a nice soft surface, so it's going to give and you're not going to break off small parts and the like. And the best part is if you're taking, like, for example, screws out of it, a couple of screws or whatever, if you drop them, or a spring, rather than fall on a workbench and again roll on the floor, you'll never find it again. They tend to fall into these little holes in the egg crate, these little depressions. So it's really a great place to hold small parts when you're working on an engine or a car or whatever. As I said, it makes a sturdy, soft cradle for working on cars and engines. And if the small parts accidentally fall out of the model, or if your screwdriver or whatever, they're likely going to land in one of those small egg pockets rather than bounce off the work surface. And a lot of times, even when I have control of the screws and everything, and I just drop them into one of those foam egg pockets. That way I know where they are. They're not going to get lost, and they're going to be right there when I want to put everything back together. Digitrax. Digitrax throttles use a 6-pin telephone jack, also known as an RJ12 modular plug. These plugs come with a small tab that lock them into the LocoNet receptacle, like a UP5 or a UP91, whatever. And the locking tab on those plugs are nice until they break off after repeated use. Just like anything, if you bend it enough, it's ultimately going to, give out and break off. Or sometimes it just gets caught on stuff. But if those tabs break off, that means that the plug is going to pull out of the LocoNet. It's not going to lock into place. And when that happens, a lot of times you can lose good electrical contact, as if it pulls out. And all of a sudden you're sitting there and your engine's barreling down and you want to slow it down, and nothing's happening when you turn that throttle. And that's because you lost contact because your RJ12 plug partially pulled out. You can send a throttle to Digitrax to get it repaired. They charge $25 plus shipping, and Digitrax is not known for speed. everything you send to them takes at least 30 days. So the question is, can I fix it myself? And the answer is yes, and it's cheap. All you need is a crimping tool and an RJ12 plugs. Crimping tools are not expensive. They're between $10 and $20. Most hardware stores have them, Lowe's or Home Depot, I believe, anywhere you go where they have the telephone wire and stuff. You can also find the RJ12 modular plugs in the same place in the hardware stores or and the like. You can also find them on eBay or online. But here's what a crimping tool looks like. And right above it are some RJ12 connectors. The connectors actually go into that. If you, I don't have my pointer here, but if you see in the towards the front of the crimpers there's a black rectangular section there. Well, there's actually a hole in there that the RJ12s slide right into. And what you do is you put the cable in your 6-wire cable in the back of the RJ12 connector. You slide the cable and the connector in there, and then you just squeeze. And lo and behold, it crimps it down, and you've got a good connection. So what you do is you cut the broken RJ12 plug off as close to the plug as possible. I use an X-Acto blade, and I trim the outer insulation off the 6-wire cable about 1/4 of an inch back. I'll slide the new RJ12 plug onto the 6 wires. You don't need to strip anything. You just slide it on. Make sure the wires are oriented, color-coded on a new plug the same way they were on the old one. And then insert the RJ12 plug and wire into the crimping tool and just squeeze. So here's a 6-wire telephone cable, and as you can see, I've cut back about 1/4 of an inch the outer insulation, so you can see the 6 wires are sticking out. And then, like I said, you just slip the those 6 wires into the end of the RJ12 plug, put the whole thing in your crimping tool and just squeeze, and lo and behold, you've got a great connection. You can also use this to add an extension to a wireless throttle. Older wireless throttles usually
You okay
have
up there?
cable on them. I'm sorry? I'm sorry, was there a question or something? No, maybe not, okay. The older wireless throttles have a short cable on them, obviously because they're wireless, so you don't need to plug them in. But you still, on the older ones, you need to plug them into the LocoNet panel in order to acquire or dispatch a locomotive. You can't do that with the older ones in a wireless mode. And plus, a lot of layout owners do not have wireless DCC. I mean, UR91 wireless LocoNet panel costs they're upwards around $100. So using a wireless throttle on these layouts means you got to plug into the LocoNet panel, especially if you're, for example, you're in a club and someone or a couple of the folks that have layouts don't have wireless, and you have a wireless throttle. So if you plug into the LocoNet panel, you're kind of really stuck close to that spot because you don't have a lot of cable to move around. So you can make an extension very quickly that'll give you some flexibility and be able to move around a bit. What I do is I just cut a length of 6-conductor telephone wire to the desired length of the extension. Just like we fixed the ends of the throttle, I put an RJ12 plug on each end. And then you can buy a thing called an RJ12 coupler. They're cheap. And this is so you can connect them together. And so you can connect the extension then to the end of the wireless throttle RJ12. You can buy these couplers, again, at hardware stores or on eBay or wherever. There again, it's a standard telephone type connector. Over on the side on the right, that's what the coupler looks like, that white rectangular piece. And you can see I've got a wireless throttle plugged in one side, and then the extension I made plugged in the other side. And as you can see, that gives me maybe about a 3-foot tether. So if I need to use this throttle in a tethered mode, I'm not going to be wired 6 inches from the local net panel. Some simple weathering. We all know that when you weather with ordinary pastels, you really need to do an overspray with a sealer when they're finished, so it doesn't dust off or get on your hands or anyone who picks the car up. Sealers can be dull and mute the weathering effect. What I found was there's a company called Bragdon Industries that makes a pastel weathering kit that does not require any sealer. Once you put it on, it's permanently affixed. You don't have to overspray anything, so you don't get that dull look that you get when you overspray a flat coat finish. This is what it looks like. They're available in hobby stores. I know I got mine up at Mainline Hobbies up in right over the Pennsylvania line. But I imagine you can get them at other hobby stores or probably online somewhere. They come with different colors. They have rust colors, various colors, light rust, mediums. And then also they have some dark, like grimy black colors. And so, for example, here's one of my Gons that I just use the Bragdon Industries weathering pastels. I just take a stiff brush, dip it into pastel, and then I brush it on. And I just do it very lightly, and I keep building it up until I get the desired effect that I want. And it takes a very short amount of time, 5 or 10 minutes, and it's done. And I think you get a pretty good job for, very simple method. This is one of my, this is a Westside G5 that I have, Long Island ran the G5s. And I did some light weathering on it again with the Bragdon Industries around the trucks and up on the boiler and everything. This is a Finneron Camerlengo P54 coach that I built. And I did, again, some more light weathering. You can see up on the roof, back in the 50s, the Long Island had a paint scheme that was a light gray on the sides, and the roofs were actually like a silver white. So I used it on the rivet seams across the roof, as you can see, and on those roof vents. And then down along the bottom edge of the side of the coach, I did a very, very light kind of a dirt rust color for any dirt would be kicked up, as well as on the steps and on the trucks. That's nice for weathering. What about rust spots? A lot of times when we see older cars and everything, they've been out, the paint starts peeling off and bubbling. And once it does, it exposes the metal underneath and they get rust. How can we weather that? I found I can't remember what it was, but there was a method that was written up, and it involved putting on about 3 coats of different kind of paint and everything, and then you had to peel off one coat. One of the undercoats was a rust color, and then you had to find a way to peel off the top coat in certain spots to show this rust. And I tried it and failed miserably, and I was really disappointed because I wanted to get that effect. And guess what? I found there are weathering pastels that also can create this effect, and they're easy. These are called weathering solutions. They're weathering decals. And this is what it looks like. You can get some with oil spots, oil streaks, as you can see on the left, or some with decals of rust spots, as you can see, that are streaking. And so here's a covered hopper I have that I weathered with the rust decals and the Bragdon pastels. And you can see those rust spots again, the way they look. I thought it gave it a nice effect. Here was another covered hopper that I weathered with rust decals and the Bragdon Industries pastels. This is a boxcar. Dave's Garage Doors is a fictitious industry on my layout. Dave's my son, and he had to build some garage doors for his garage at his house, and so I decided to give him a business that I can deliver goods to. So I made a boxcar, and as you can see, I weathered it fairly heavily. Again, with the rust decals and the Bragdon Industries pastels. And then here's a reefer that I did with 3 different kinds. I used the Bragdon pastel weathering. I used a weathering solution, rust spots, and then I put some graffiti decals on it to boot. So, you know, if you've ever been up in New York, you'll probably see on the Long Island Railroad, there's hardly a place where you don't see graffiti on something. So I did this to a number of my cars. Let's get back to the workbench. One of the biggest things I always have trouble with is when I have small screws and they've got to go in from the top down. How do I hold them, especially when they're really small? And you got to start them in a tight spot. Well, if you got a slotted screwdriver that they make that expands the blade, these will sometimes work depending upon the screw. It's you know, the screw and how big the slot is. It'll hold the slot heads. It'll hold the slot head screw. But if you got a Phillips or a Torx head screw, not as easy. And so what I found is I was sitting there and I had a tub of soldering paste that I keep on my workbench when I'm soldering. And if I dip the end of the screwdriver, like a little Phillips head, small Phillips head screwdriver, into the soldering paste and then put the screw on the end, the paste is sticky enough to hold the screw while you start it. But it doesn't form a permanent bond. So as soon as you get that screw started, you can easily lift that screwdriver out. So it's just something sticky. And I would imagine other sticky pastes, you can use Vaseline or toothpaste or anything like that, would also work. But it's handy. This is my thing of soldering paste that I use. And as you can see, when I dip the screwdriver in and then pick up a small screw, that screw is going to be stuck to it. And so I can hold it upright and work, you know, put it right into place without it falling off, especially if it has to go in some little place, you know, that I can't get my fingers in. Backdrops. In my Long Island, you know, a lot of us, we build our layouts around the wall and we use the walls itself as our backdrops. But when I built my New York City, it's called a city terminal zone extension onto my layout. It was in the area where I had, on one wall, I had my water meter and my main water shutoff valve coming in. On the other wall, I had a big drain pipe coming down, and on the other wall, I had a water heater and a furnace. And as much as I scratched my head, there was no way in the world I was going to do an around the wall type of extension for my layout, because I figured, you know, if I had to replace that hot water heater or that furnace, or just a service person had to get in there, it was going to be impossible. And if I had to get at the water meter or the shutoff valve, it was also going to be tough. So I opted for an island. which worked out fine, except the trouble is that when you're trying to photograph scenes on it, it's a little bit of a challenge because your background is a water heater or a furnace or a shut-off valve or whatever, or a pipe and the like. So what to do? Well, what I decided to do is I got a lightweight piece of foam board, 4x8 foam board from a hardware store, or as I guess it was at Lowe's or Home Depot. These foam boards are used for insulation. They come in 4x8 sheets. They're probably about 5/8 of an inch thick. Very, very lightweight. They're inexpensive. And you can attach background to it. You can paint it sky blue. You can glue building fronts on it. And what I do is I just slide it around the area that I want to photograph. So, for example, here's the 4x8 sheet I had. And as you can see, it's slid out of place. It slides over to the left, and you can see that the building on it will butt up against those buildings on the permanent wall, those darker buildings right there. So yeah, there's a seam going straight up to the ceiling, but the background is going to be continuous. But that slides around. You can see it's a little bit lower than the ceiling. And so when I want to take a picture, a photograph of, my module there on that center island, I just slide the background wherever this backdrop behind wherever I want to take the picture, and then I have a nice city scene in the background rather than looking at a hot water heater or a pipe coming down or whatever else I have on the wall. Then when I'm done, I just slide it back into place. And what it does is it covers up the area where my furnace and hot water heater is. But it also slides out. So if I have to, for any reason, service the hot water heater or the furnace, and believe me, I've had to replace both since I built this, and it worked out fine. It just slides right out of place, and they can, service people can get in there and get the hot water heater out and get the furnace out and the like. This is a simple one. I think I actually saw this at a convention a long time ago. So this is not something that's comes out of my brilliant head. But Caboose Industry turnouts, they make the hand throws that are very nice. I mean, if you don't want to get into, going under the layout, installing switch machines and switches and the electrical and all that, and you just want to do a hand throw on the top of your layout, Caboose Industries makes a nice hand throw. And you can enhance them. What I do is I first nail a small brad on each side of the hand throw, which limits the throw. If you ever use these things, you know that when you flip them over, they will go right down to the ground. And sometimes, unless you got some nice good fingernails, they're a pain in the butt to pull up. So if you put a nail, a little brad there, it limits the throw. It still lets the turnout throw all the way. But it holds the throw up enough that you can grab it very easily. So what I do is I just paint one side of the end of the hand throw and one brad head red, and then the other hand throw side, and the brad head, I paint green. And like I said, the brad also keeps the handle from swinging too far and makes it easier to grab. So in the top, you can see, and I use red for when the turnout is diverging, and I use green for when the turnout is going straight. But as you can see, when the turnout, the hand throw is flipped over to the right, I paint that side red and I paint the brad red. So anyone that looks at it says, oh, it's red, therefore it's diverging. And then if I flip it, or whoever is running a railroad and flips it, to the other way, so the turnout's going straight, I paint the other side green and I paint the brad head green. And so a quick glance and you can see it's green, and you know which way that the turnout is being thrown. And that's pretty good, especially when you have operating sessions, because one of the biggest problems I always see with operating sessions is some of the guys forget to throw the turnouts, and they get derailments because they forgot to throw them. So anything that can help is probably welcome. Cleaning engine wheels. This is always a problem. You get dust and anything gets on the tracks, and you run your trains around enough, and it's going to get on the wheels. So what I found works real nice and easy is I use Deoxit, which is an electronic spray cleaner. You don't have to use it any kind. There's a lot of brands of electronic spray cleaners out there. But I happen to like this one. All I need is a can of that, a spray can of that, and a paper towel. And what I do is I put the paper towel on the tracks, and then I soak it with the spray of Deoxit. So you can see that's pretty much saturated through. And then what I do is just I run a train up with one set of engine wheels on the saturated paper towel. Now remember, this only is going to work if your engine has a front and rear electrical pickups, because you want those wheels turning. So if your engine only picks up on one set of trucks, it's probably not going to work at all, because the set of trucks that has to be picking up is going to have to be on the tracks, and the other ones won't be turning anyway. And if you put the one, so with those, you probably need to kind of do those by hand very carefully. But if you got an engine that picks up on both sets of trucks, a diesel, just run the one set of trucks up on that paper towel, keep the other set of trucks on the track so that they're turning. And lo and behold, you'd be amazed or disgusted, or both, when you see how much dirt actually comes off. So what I do is I just I run the train on there. You can see those two that are not, those two streaks that are not aligned with the tracks. That was the first run when I put the engine on there. And then what I do is I take the engine off, I slide it back. I slide the paper towel over so I get a clean section that's still saturated. Then I run the train back on it again. And I keep doing that back and forth until, as you can see in that center track there, I stop getting that dark color, that dirt, which tells me those wheels are now pretty clean. And once I get there, I just turn the engine around and I repeat the process. And now I've got a nice clean set of engine wheels that are going to have good electrical pickup on the track. Speaking of keeping things clean, we all know that we get stuff on our layout. I don't know where it comes from, but I always find sometimes little pieces of ballast on the roads, on the rooftops. I don't know how it gets there or whatever, but it does. Or I get dust or whatever. And getting into those spots sometimes is very difficult. If you've got something like a dust buster, that can pick up in big areas on your layout. But if you're trying to get down, for example, on a road between buildings and everything, or down on a sidewalk or someplace, it can get a little dicey because you can't get that vacuum in there. Or if you do, it's going to suck up everything, including cars, people, you name it. What I found was a small, inexpensive battery-powered vacuum. And these are the kind that they actually sell. They're intended for computer keyboards to keep, the junk from getting between the keys. And these things will pick up small pieces of debris, dust, etc. And you can really slip them into some tight spots in your layout. So I usually use this. I go around a lot of times, and if I've got to get down in between buildings or down on a street, on a sidewalk, or around some figures and everything, and I don't want to suck up everything in sight, these things work great. I found this again, my favorite place, eBay. Just type in mini vacs or anything, and I think this was like $15 or $20. Runs on 2 AA batteries. Very easy to unscrew the top and clean it, empty the stuff, and then just put it right back together. I've had this thing now probably at least about 10 years. It's working fine. It does a great job. So anyway, it's a nice, easy way to keep your layout clean with some of the details. Coupler height. Despite standards, coupler height differences among cars can occur. I have no idea why, but they do. There are several ways you can adjust coupler height. If you want to raise a coupler height, you can add a thin washer between the trucks and the car body. That'll raise the coupler up a bit. You can use, if you have KD couplers, you can raise the coupler height with an undershank coupler. What that means is that the shank of the coupler joins the knuckle at the bottom part rather than in the middle of the knuckle. If you want to lower your coupler height, there are several ways you can do it. Again, if you have KDs, you can replace the coupler with an overshank coupler. And all that means is that the shank connects to the knuckle on the top of the knuckle rather than the middle. So the knuckle is essentially lowered a little bit. If your coupler pockets are not permanently mounted to the car body, you can insert KD ships between the coupler pocket and the car body. This will lower the coupler a bit. Third way is to just change the wheel size, or use smaller wheels or larger ones, and this will lower or raise the coupler. Freight car wheels come in 28-inch, 33-inch, and 36-inch scale diameters. Usually the 36 inches are used on bigger freight cars, heavier ones than ever, and the like. And 33-inch are pretty much standard for the normal, like the 40-foot box cars and stuff that a lot of us run. But just to show that you can do this without having to fool around with all the couplers or anything, if you got some different sized wheels, the left photo over here on the left side, these are 2 identical cars, and both of them have 33-inch wheels, so you can see the couplers are aligned perfectly. And just to show how much you can change the height of a coupler, the right photo has the same cars, but the car on the left has the smaller size wheels, 28-inch wheels, and the car on the right has 33-inch. So you can see that little offset in the couplers. Basically, that was, with the 28-inch, you can lower the coupler. If you use 36 inches wheels, it'll raise the coupler a bit. So it's just another way you can change coupler height very quickly, just by changing out some wheel sets. Most of us may know this, but now, you can make your own decals very easily. You can use white or clear decal paper. This is available now. You can get on the internet, probably at places, like Staples or whatever. The nice part about making your own decals is you can use clip art or other figures along with different fonts and the like, and you can make custom ones. And I have an industry on my layout called Kelsey Seafood, and I decided to make a couple of custom box cars for it, or reefers. And I wanted a clam on the side because when I was growing up on Long Island, I used to dig clams in the summer out on Northport Bay, and I'd sell them wholesaler, Kelsey Seafood. So I wanted a reefer with a big clam on the side. So I searched the internet. I finally found a nice picture of a clam. I printed it out on a decal. I made a sign for the side there. It says Kelsey Seafood, again on a decal. This is on decal paper and the like. And what you do is you just print that out on a computer. All these decals, usually the decal paper requires an overspray. Once it comes off, don't touch it. It's got to dry. It'll smudge if you touch it right away. And then what you have to do is seal it. I usually use like a clear sealer on it, either a flat or just an acrylic sealer, and let that dry. Once that's done, then you can put them on just with water. You know, it's a water-based slide decal and the like. Just beware, light colored decals made on inkjet or laser printers are not going to show up on a dark background. So for example, if you decide you want yellow lettering on a dark brown, say, boxcar, guess what? It's not going to show up. It doesn't print that opaquely, which means that brown is going to bleed right through and you're not going to see it. There are ways around it. Well, I mean, first off, I always recommend if you want clear, if you're going to use clear, print a dark colored decal and apply it to a lighter colored surface. If you've got a dark colored surface, the other way you can do it is you can print on, instead of using clear decal paper, use white decal paper. But what you have to do is try and make the background of the decal, for example, lettering, the same color as the box car or the whatever car you're going to put it on. For example, if your car is black, you can print, for example, a yellow lettering, you know, with the name of whatever you want on it. But you have to make it with a black background. And then you would cut, for example, a rectangular piece with the lettering and a black background and slide that whole thing onto the car. So the black background will then hopefully blend in with the black color of the car. That's one way to get around it, so you can have light lettering on a dark background. But it can get a little tricky because a lot of times it's hard to match the background color on the computer with the dark color of whatever you're trying to put the decal on. Here's some sources of decal paper. There's others. You just go on the internet and, or eBay or whatever, or just Google decal paper, and you'll find a ton of places that sell this stuff. Electrical connectors, lights, illuminated signs that are in or on buildings are usually fed by wires from under the benchwork. I like being able to quickly remove a building from the layout if I need to change a bulb, troubleshoot it, or whatever, and the like. And I can do this if I have little mini connectors, so I can quickly unplug that building rather than have to go under the layout, disconnect it from some terminal block or something. Miniatronics makes some very nice ones, but they're not cheap. They cost about $10 for two sets. These are a two-prong plug. They're very small. One side has a little white dot on it, so they're nice because if you're worried about polarity, that'll help you to make sure you don't get something backwards. The advantage is that they're small and they don't need a very small hole. But what I found is now there are cheaper connectors available. These are a lot less expensive than the Miniatronics. I found these on a company called Hobby Field on eBay. They were like $5.93, and you got 20 connectors. And as you can see, they're just about the same size as the Miniatronics. And they plug together and they work fine. I've used these on buildings. I've used them actually on some of my locomotives when I when I put a decoder into a steam locomotive and I got to go from the tender up to the engine. These make good connectors between the tender and the engine. Background perspectives. Forced perspective is a way to give the viewer a feeling of there being more distance in front of them than there really is. Adding a printed backdrop can do this. You can also put a hill or a tree line towards the back of your layout and leave a space between it, maybe 6 to 10 inches between it and the wall. And it does give the viewer a feeling of depth because they feel like there's something in between, say, the top of that hill and the wall behind it that's 6 or 10 inches away, whatever. Just so you can see, this is a photo backdrop I got from, I think it was a backdrop company. I can't remember which one. Nice city scene. I was hoping to look, close to New York City. But as you can see, I put it up behind, this is my Sunnyside yard down here, and there's a big warehouse in front of it. And then the backdrop tries to depict New York City way in the background of it. Another way to get forced perspective, add some small scale buildings. Putting smaller scale building fronts on top of a scale building front will also give the appearance of depth. For example, I use N scale building fronts on top of HO scale building fronts. And you got to add a building side with perspective to show depth. So for example, these are HO buildings down in the lower part here. And then you can see up behind it, those are N-scale buildings. I bought some, I think it was design preservation N-scale buildings. You can usually use parts of them, usually like the front and the back, to make buildings. Over on the upper right, I believe that's the back of a building, as you can see, that I used. And then those other ones sort of in the middle, those are building fronts. And so what I do is I just paint them and I typically put shades in the window, and then I put either spray them black or put a piece of black paint some cardboard black and glue it against there so you don't really look in the windows. But the trick to get perspective is those little pieces, those triangular pieces on the, trapezoidal pieces on the side that try to show some depth with the side of the building. And I just paint those usually like a darker color. Typically these buildings are brick. So I try to paint them either like a brown or a brick red and the like. And it gives it some feeling of depth. Here's some others on my layout. Again, you can see some of the ones with just the rectangular windows. Those are building backs that I used from kits. And then the ones with the more ornate windows in the front, those are building fronts. But again, I try to get some perspective. They always say duct tape is the handyman's secret weapon. Well, I found that weldwood contact cement is a close second. If you need to glue larger pieces onto a flat surface, for example, sheet styrene plastic for sidewalks and under buildings. For example, when I was building my Atlantic branch in my Flatbush Avenue, I put the roads down, and then I have sidewalks, which are raised up maybe about, 1/8 of an inch. And then there are buildings. So the buildings have to sit on something that's roughly 1/8 of an inch high too. So they are flush with the sidewalk. And so all that has to be glued down onto the surface of the layout. And so what I did is I used contact cement, weldwood contact cement. It holds super tight. It doesn't unbond with age, and it goes on fairly easy. You simply brush it on both surfaces that need to be joined. You don't stick them together right away. You let it dry. You let each surface dry for about 10 to 30, I'm sorry, about 20, 30 minutes. And you'll be able to see, it'll lose its gloss, which means it's dry. It'll be flat then, a flat color. And it'll just be tacky if you touched it. And then you join the pieces together. But note that these things, once they're stuck, these things are stuck for good. Okay. It's very hard to make adjustments. So you got to make sure that when you're putting stuff down, it's in the exact right place. A lot of times, before it really sets up, if you push and the like, you can usually move it maybe an eighth, a 16th of an inch, but it's not that easy. But again, once this stuff is down, it's going to stay down. And I use this. It's been, for example, on my Flatbush Avenue. I think I built that back in 2015. So it's been about almost 8 years, and I've had no problems with it at all. Grade crossings and station platforms on curved tracks. A lot of us use flex track rather than sectional. If you use sectional track, that comes in radiuses of like 18 and 15, 18, 22 inches. And they do make grade crossings for like roads and stuff that are in these set radiuses and the like. But a lot of us use flex track. And so the radius going around a curve where we might have a road is not going to be 18 or 22 inches. It may be something bigger or smaller or in between, but it's not going to be those exact ones. So these commercial grade crossings are not going to work. So how can we make a grade crossing that fits perfectly? Well, if you're making roads, I usually make them out of cardboard. And what I do is I rub the graphite from a pencil on top of the rails. So for example, here's where I want to have a grade crossing come across two tracks. And so what I do is I take a pencil and I rub it on top of the tracks. Usually I just do it like a swiping stroke just to get it so I know there's graphite on top of the rails. And then I can put the piece of cardboard that I want for the roadway on top, and I just move it ever so slightly, just back and forth a little bit, just enough so that the graphite shows up on the back of the cardboard. And lo and behold, when you flip it over, you get a perfect curve of the radius of your track. So now you can cut along there and glue it in place, and you've got a nice roadway that butts right up against the rails. For the filler piece between the rails, again, you can put graphite on both rails and rub roadway material over it. But then you have to cut the filler piece slightly narrower than the graphite marks because you need to have the wheel flange clearance. If it butts up against the tracks, your train's going to derail because it won't be able to get through. From multiple track crossings, you build up the elevation between the tracks. I do it with layers of cardboard. So the top layer will be just about at the same elevation as the top of the rails. So here you can see I've made a filler piece between the rails. I've cut it a little bit narrower than the rail, the distance between the tracks. And then I made a filler piece between the inner track and the outer track that, again, butts up against the rails. And as you can see underneath, I put some filler cardboard underneath it to get the elevation up. So it's pretty flat going across the rails. And here's a picture of the finished crossing. with it painted with some decals on it, and cars and people and crossing gates and the like. So, as you can probably heard throughout most of this, I'm a fan of eBay. I found I like to peruse eBay sometimes just for fun, just for giggles, to see what's on there. You can find a lot of rare, out of production stuff not available in hobby shops. People that are getting rid of collections, stuff that's been out of production for years, shows up there. I have a lot of cars on my layout. I have something like over 800, and I constantly like to search eBay for different vehicles that are, my main year is about 1964. So I try to get vehicles that are in the 50s or the early 60s. And a lot of times I just like to peruse there and see if I can find any that somebody's decided they're going to get rid of and the like. And I found a bunch of really neat ones. I mean, for example, nobody really makes a 1959 Chevrolet sedan other than Alloy Forms. And the problem with them is they don't have windshields. But I found one on eBay with a windshield and everything. I don't know who makes it, but it's beautiful. So anyway, I'm a big fan of finding stuff on eBay. The other thing is that eBay vendors a lot of times have a large supply of stuff available. So if you need a lot of something, okay, you go to a hobby shop, and unfortunately, as much as I like to frequent hobby shops, unfortunately, they don't stock a lot of things. Sometimes they may only have 3 or 4 of them, or 2 or 3, and you need more. So eBay is a good place if you need a lot of stuff, because a lot of these guys have a much larger inventory on it. So anyway, I just point that out, that I find a lot of good, weird stuff on there, and it's a good place to find stuff. Dispensing liquid glue, plastic glue. Liquid glue for bonding plastic usually comes in a jar with a brush, or a tube, attached to a screw top. One of the problems is trying to join a long or a large surface. It's difficult because the glue starts, if you're using that brush, the glue starts to evaporate before you can coat all the surfaces. And that's especially true. I was building some of my high-rise buildings by that, I can't remember the name of the company up in Baltimore that makes those big high-rises, those beautiful ones. But I found that if you use a plastic bottle with a small tip applicator, like a syringe tip, you can just hold it right up at the top, and the glue will actually just run right down the seam on a long surface and bond it before it can evaporate. So it's really very handy if you're trying to glue a long surface. You don't want to sit there and have to brush stuff on. You can just use this to squeeze a thin bead of glue right down very quickly. Custom Model Railroads was the place I was talking about, that has those nice, big, beautiful high-rise buildings. And this is perfectly, this is the perfect dispenser for building those kits. They sell them, actually. If you go to their website, I think they're about $4. Or again, you can probably find them on eBay or even a hobby shop. But they're very handy. Wax paper as a light diffuser. Most buildings come with clear plastic for the windows. So you got a choice. If you want to model an interior, then the clear plastic will let you see the interior. But if you don't model the interior of a building, depending upon the light in your layout room and everything, the clear plastic is going to let everybody see that there's an empty building there. There's nothing inside of it. And also, if you add interior lights, you're going to see not only the empty interior, but also the light bulbs, which takes away from the realism. And I decided I did not want to put interiors in all my buildings. And so what I do is I put wax paper behind the clear plastic windows. And what this does is allows the light to pass, but diffuses the light so you can't really see inside the building. So for example, here's a City Classics building, the front, and I've put their windows in with the advertising names on them, as you can see, in place. I glued them in. Then I glued shades on some of the windows or blinds up like in the upper right corner. And then what I did is I glued a piece of wax paper on the whole thing on the back. Now here's that building from the front in daylight. So you can see that that wax paper kind of diffuses so you're not looking into an empty building. And then for a night scene, when you put lights behind them, this diffuses the light again. So you're not looking into an empty building and the like. You'll note I put the other buildings have wax paper in them as well. So again, you don't see the interiors. Now in these first floor buildings, I did put interiors on them, some counters and stuff. So at least when you look in them, you can see something. Storefront signs from the internet. Many storefront signs are ornate and unique. You just go around in your hometown or anywhere and look around. You'll see all different kind of signs. Now, the storefront signs found in most model kits are usually, at least I don't think so, not as ornate as those often found in real life. And on top of that, if ever, if a lot of modelers buy the same kit and use the same sign, you're going to have the same building on everybody's layout. So I said, well, why not use signs found in real life? So I go on the internet and I just type in, for example, I was doing Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn. So I typed in Flatbush Avenue storefront signs, and lo and behold, I got a whole bunch of pictures with all sorts of different storefronts. So what I did is I found the ones, you got to find the ones that are looking head on to the building, not at an angle, but heading straight on. There really shouldn't be any shadows or anything. And also make sure there's nothing in front of the sign, like a telephone pole or the bottom of a fire escape or anything. So for example, here's one I found, DePaulo's Fine Foods, okay? And so what I do is there was a thumbnail or whatever, and I just dragged it onto my desktop on my computer. I put it into my photo editing program and I cropped it down to size. In other words, I got rid of the storefront because all I really wanted was that sign up at the top, DePaulo's. So I cropped it so the photograph was strictly just that sign. And then what I did is I put it into a drawing program. I have a Mac computer, so I put it into what's called Pages. And what I do is I measure the distance, the width of my building. As you can see, that one there is that one with the 4 windows. I measured that. It's usually something around like 2 3/4, 2 3/8 inches. And so I adjust the size of the sign to fit directly across the front of the building. And once I do that, then I print it out, and I use glossy photo paper. I print it out on glossy photo paper. I cut it out, the sign. I then glue it onto a thin piece of styrene plastic, like 020 or 030 styrene plastic. And then I glue the plastic to the front of the building. And then I put an awning on it. That's just made out of paper. And I get a pretty good effect. And you can see the sign to the right, Gary Jewelers, is the same thing. That's one I got off the internet. There's a couple others I got off the internet: Reliable Frank's Naval Uniforms, Smith's Bar and Restaurant, this Lennox Lounge over here, which is kind of famous, I think, up in Manhattan. I use that. And then, with the exception of that theater sign right there in the middle, all these are storefront signs were made from real Brooklyn or Queens storefront photos that I found on the internet. The theater sign actually is, that's a Miller Engineering marquee that lights up and the like. And the theater is a Walters kit. Just for your information, that marquee, the Miller marquee, works perfectly on that Walters theater, but you can't use the arced sign in the front where the marquee goes. There's an arced one that's like a half round that sticks out, and that's because that sign here, the word says Casablanca, that will not wrap around it. But it will go directly across perfectly in front of the flat part of the theater. Cheap and easy uncoupling picks. Most of you are probably familiar with this now. Barbecue skewers, which you can get in grocery stores, make really nice uncoupling picks, and they're cheap. And what I do is I got a whole bunch of them. I cut them so they're a little bit shorter. And I go up to the local hardware store, or you can go to a pet store and get some fish tank tubing. That's the same inside diameter as those skewers. And I just cut it. And then I just put a dab of glue in there, and I slide the plastic tubing over the top of the pick. And lo and behold, I got a nice uncoupling pick. So this just says what I just told you. And the other thing is that when you put that plastic on, it helps mount, so you can mount these picks on your layout front. Obviously, when we have operating sessions and people have to do switching at certain areas, I make sure I've got, like, for example, a magnetic uncoupling tool there, if they want to use that to stick between the cars, or if they want to use the pick. And what I do is I put two small eye bolts screwed into the fascia, as you can see, and make sure the eye diameter is just slightly larger than the skewer stick diameter, but it's got to be smaller than that plastic tube diameter. And then you just slide the pick right in there, and that holds it in place right in front of the layout. So when your operators get to that area and want to do some uncoupling, they just got to grab that. And the only bad part is that usually after every operating session, I have to go around and I find the picks all over the layout because people put them in their top pocket. And, they've let it follow them with them as they take their train around. So I usually have to go around and put them back in the right spots. This is something just simple, a magnet car. This is kind of handy if you just want to run around your layout every now and then to pick up any small metal objects that have fallen between the tracks. You know, sometimes you get a coupler that comes off in the worst spot and the like, and there's a screw left in there on the track somewhere, you know, or just a railroad spike if you were working on the tracks and you forgot a spike or whatever. Just glue a couple magnets, flat magnets, on the bottom of I just used a piece of styrene plastic and mounted a couple trucks on it and one coupler. And I just run that around the layout and pick up whatever happens to be sitting between the rails. Let's go back to signs. You want to make some neat looking signs that are a little different. If you go to a craft store, like Michael's or whatever, they usually have a big rack, and I mean big, with a variety of these stick-on pictures that are almost, they're not quite three-dimensional, okay, but they're a little bit raised and the like. You can use these to make signs. So for example, I have a Peel's Brewery on my layout. And so I found on the internet a Peel's beer sign right there, which I printed out. I told you about that. Print them out and I mounted it on a piece of plastic. And then I found these stick-ons with beer steins full of beer. And so I glued them next to the Peel sign, and I put that up. So it's just something a little bit different. My son likes to play the guitar, and so I decided I was going to give him a guitar shop on my layout. And lo and behold, I found some stick-ons, these in the craft store, of some electric guitars, and even a sign that said Fender. So I put this together for a sign. So anyway, that pretty much finishes up my clinic here. These slides are available on the Potomac website, Potomac Division website. You just go to potomac-nmra.org and follow the links to clinics and just go down until you find one on 43 years of tips and tricks. So anyway, I hope this maybe, you picked up a few things out of this and the like, and thanks for everyone's attention. Sorry I ran over a bit. Were there any questions?